My name is Elizabeth Buchanan from the Center for Applied Ethics. This is the third in our campus series on free speech. If you remember way back, it seems like a very long time ago, back in October, we had our first campus forum that represented a range of perspectives. After the Firefly incident, we came together as a group to talk about issues, to talk about rights and responsibilities. Our second talk was held in conjunction with the Social Science Society as well, and that dealt with personhood and free speech in relation to political contributions. And we had a member from Move to Amend come in and talk about the Citizens United ruling. And today we are meeting once again to talk about rights and responsibilities and free speech with a representative from FIRE, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. Our goal way back in October, as a campus, we had conflict. We were unsure of how we felt about very significant issues. Our goal back then was to provide a campus forum about individual rights in a collective campus environment, individual rights as articulated in the First Amendment. In our first session, we had representatives from the Ally Center, we had representatives from the student body, and we had Dr. Tim Scheel, who's written extensively on First Amendment rights, and particularly campus speech codes. Let's not forget that our primary job here is to work with students, to educate students, and that includes teaching them about civic responsibilities in addition to their academic training. So it's really great that we are able to partner with the students at the Social Science Society. So thank you to Andrew and his colleagues. Today we are going to look broadly at countrywide and campus-wide trends in academic freedom. And this is not only a US debate. It's very easy, I think many of us know, to get sucked into our own campuses, and we forget about the larger picture, and we think it's only us, it's only this campus, it's only that campus. But it really is a growing issue across our country and in other countries as well. I mentioned to Adam just before, I received an email from a colleague of mine in Canada who sits on the Canadian Association of University Professors, and they're dealing with some issues with social media. So Carleton College has recently come out with a policy on personal online presences. So what can you and what can't you do as a representative of your university, not only in person, but in online spaces as well. So we're seeing these issues get very, very complicated. We're seeing a lot of issues around free speech, academic freedoms, and responsibilities on college campuses. We today are very happy to welcome Adam Kissel. Adam is amazingly busy, as you can imagine. Adam is he graduated from Harvard University and from the University of Chicago, where he served as student liaison to the Board of Trustees and earned a master's degree from the Committee on Social Thought. Adam's academic interests include the history and theory of liberal education, the history and theory of rhetoric, and rhetoric's relationship with philosophy. He has also served as a professional editor for Nobel laureate James Heckman and for faculty in a variety of disciplines. Before joining FIRE, Adam was a director of the Lehrman American Studies Center and the Jack Miller Center for the Teaching of America's Founding Principles. With Sharon Brown, he wrote a faculty rights handbook in 2007. Since joining FIRE, he has spoken about individual rights on college campuses in California, Colorado, Delaware, DC, Florida, Georgia, and I can go on and on with the number of states, and he just came from yesterday at another institution in Calumet. In 2009, Adam won a first prize in education reporting from the National Education Writers Association, and it's really exciting to have Adam here. I'll say this and maybe stick my neck out a little bit. I don't know how many campuses bring FIRE in after an incident. I have no idea, and maybe that's something you'll want to share with us. When we talked about this, it seemed to us that it was the right thing to do. We have worked as a campus in a very positive way after the incident, as we will refer to it, And after you speak today, we're going to have Tim Shield come up and talk about the positive directions that Stout has taken in light of this. This was a learning experience, I think, for many of us. And so we'll have Tim talk a little bit about the campus policies that have been taken after, since then. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew just to say a few words as well, and then we'll turn it over to Adam. Thank you.
All right. So I'm Andrew Petron. I'm the president of the Social Science Society, one of the groups that helped put this together. And before we begin, I'd like to give a little background about the incident that she referred to. As many of you know, last semester there was a conflict on campus regarding an instructor who had a poster on his door from the sci-fi series Firefly. And it read, "You don't know me, son, so let me explain this to you once. If I ever kill you, you'll be awake, you'll be facing me, and you'll be armed." This poster was taken as a threat of violence by the campus police, and the poster was soon removed from his door. The instructor was threatened with criminal charges, and he was reported to the campus threat assessment team. Soon afterwards, the instructor proceeded to place a second poster on his door that read, "Warning, fascism. Fascism can cause blunt trauma and or violent death. Keep away from children and pets." This poster was also soon removed by the campus police. At this point, the instructor contacted FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, for help. Our speaker today is Adam Kissel. He's the Vice President of Programs at FIRE, and he'll be talking to us about the rights that individuals have on campus, the tools they have for defending those rights, and the role that his organization plays in helping individuals keep informed about their rights and react when those rights are threatened. So, if you will, I'll give the floor over to Adam and let him tell us more about FIRE.
Thanks for those great introductions, although one of you took my notes.
Oh, did I take them?
Maybe. FIRE, for the last 12 years, has been defending student and faculty rights on college and university campuses in the United States. We think those rights are not just given to you by the government, but they're the rights that you have as human beings, being rational beings who work by reasons, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. And that if someone violates your rights, they're doing something to you as a human being. They're doing something to your dignity. It's not just that the government has given you rights and some other government official has taken them away, but you have rights as a human being that are constitutive of who you are. And that's such an important thing, to be a human being who's trying to figure out who you are and what you believe and what your deepest thoughts and views and values are in a community of other people. There's something especially great about that when you're doing that in the college or university environment, because you're admitting a certain level of intellectual humility, where you're saying, you know what, I don't know all the things all the time. In fact, there are huge amounts of things that I don't know and that our civilization thought we knew and that we changed our mind about. And if we don't actually think about what we believe and what we know in a serious and disciplined way, we're simply going to reproduce all of our prejudices generation after generation. We're doing something that is not simply doing what the K-12 system does, reproducing our cultural values for the next generation. We're trying to do something countercultural, maybe learn something new, try something different, and see if that works, and take that back out to the rest of society. And when college professors and college students are doing that in that community, they're really doing something in kind of an elite way, right? So you're not just in the K-12 system anymore. You become adults, you become professors, and you're really trying to take that extra step. When you're in a community of people who are trying to do this together, you're saying, you know what, all the views and values that I came into adulthood with might be right, but they also might be wrong. And, you know, and I'm old enough to know that what I thought was good and true and beautiful when I was 13 turned out not to be. And then when I became 21 and I looked at what I was like as a college freshman, I said, what was I thinking? And then when I became 30 and I looked what I did in my 20s, you know, so that kind of the human condition is to be wrong about a lot of things a lot of the time. And once you kind of appreciate that, most of the time, intellectual humility is important, because you actually end up disagreeing with yourself, you know, maybe even the next day after you were so sure you were right. That puts you in a mode of appreciating not only that you might be wrong, but that other people might be right. Now what that does on the college or university campus is hopefully that gives you a different way of looking at the kind of skills you're building on the campus. So you say, you know what, I'm trying to argue better. I'm trying to learn about how to make good arguments and weigh other people's arguments and assess counter arguments Because I might actually be wrong, and the person I'm arguing with, or the book I'm reading, or the article I'm reading, might actually be right. And the next step is you say, well, I'm expecting to be wrong a lot of the time, and I'm expecting somebody to challenge my deepest views and beliefs an awful lot of the time. If you're only hanging around with people all the time who agree with you, and you're only reading the books and articles that fit with your ideology and that don't bug you and don't offend you, if it's not hurting, you're not really getting a good education. You're not really expanding your own mind and really trying to change your mind and learn things, change the way you look at the world. So what we say is if you go through 4 years of college, or actually the average is like 6 years, if you go through 6 years of college without being offended on a regular basis, you should ask for your money back, or you're not doing it right, or you're taking the wrong courses. What you should be doing is seeking out those hard conversations, right? You want someone to come up to you on a regular basis and say, all right, why do you believe what you believe? Are you really going to be a Christian or a Jewish person or a Muslim or an atheist? Why is that so right? And you know, that's actually going to sound kind of offensive at first, especially when you're doing that the first few times. And you come up to someone and you confront them and say, you know, prove to me that your religion or your deepest beliefs are actually right and true. Or that that painting is actually beautiful and not ugly. Or that that book is actually good for people and not bad for people if they read it. But as you go through your college experience and your professional life, you get better at it. You get better at reading and evaluating arguments, but you also get better at dialogue and thinking together and persuading one another. So that by the time you graduate, or as you advance in your professional life, those conversations that might seem offensive at first actually go along a little bit smoother, a little bit more smoothly, but you're still probably going to offend each other an awful lot of the time if you're doing it right. If you're really trying to get to the bottom of the disagreements that you have with one another. And we live in the kind of tolerant society where you kind of have to do that. Because as Jonathan Raups said, other countries, they resolve their disagreements by killing each other. We only kill each other's ideas. Right? So it's fine to kill somebody else's ideas, and you might even feel kind of metaphorically attacked or personally attacked, but that's very different from someone beating you up because they disagree with you. And so in our culture, in our civilization, it's okay to kill one another's ideas, to come right up to someone and say, you know what, you're a jerk and everything you stand for is bad. That's protected speech, right? Now, that doesn't end the conversation. That's only step one in the conversation, because then the whole rest of the conversation has to happen, right? Because then you say, all right, you just called me a jerk and said everything I stand for is wrong. Persuade me, prove it, because otherwise I'm going to think you're a jerk. And then you get that dialogue happening. If, in contrast, you take the male chauvinist pig and you think, you know, people who are sexist have no role to play in our community, just go off to the pig pen, play with the other pigs. We don't want to have you here on campus. Well, you don't ever have that dialogue, right? You want to, if you really want to change society and have fewer sexists on campus, you don't want to send people to a place where they're going to polarize and only talk to other people who agree with them out in the pig pen, and then one day come back, and then you're surprised when they say more sexist things and they suddenly reemerge. No, instead, you want to know who you shouldn't turn your back to. You want to know who the Klansmen are. You want to know who the really bad, evil people are from your point of view, so that you know to avoid them or be careful around them, but also so that you might actually be able to engage in dialogue with them. The last thing you should do is send them out of your community. You're an educational institution. The first thing you should do to the sexist pig, if you think he needs to change, is try to get him into the gender studies course, where it's a safe space for sexism, so that the sexist can say the sexist things, and then the other people in class can say, do you really think that? Why don't you read this book or read this article? Why don't we have a polite conversation about why you really think that sexist thing? Maybe that person then changes, but then because of our own intellectual humility, maybe they actually persuade us that, well, the thing that you thought was sexist, actually, there's some data for this small piece of it, or I didn't actually say the sexist thing, you thought I said it, but I was saying something else. You actually have that friendly dialogue, and it might, you know, start out and feel offensive, but you actually get that engagement going, and instead of expelling those people from your social community, you've engaged them. And so that's kind of the model that I have for a healthy educational environment. It's one where people are not always happy and where people's feelings are often hurt, but it's because they're really engaging, really putting themselves out there and trying to learn things and trying to be something that they weren't before, trying to interrogate your deepest views and values with other people who are doing it together. So that's kind of my overall feeling about what a healthy higher education experience is, both at the student level and at the faculty level. And the sad truth is that the way I want things to be is not the way they are, right? So there are two main ways that universities and colleges fail in this mission. One is as a matter of policy, and the other is as a matter of practice. As a matter of policy, we find that about 2/3 of universities in the country maintain unconstitutional speech codes, policies that severely and substantially restrict freedom of speech for various kinds of reasons. And we rate about 400 schools a year, and we give the policies of all those 400 schools a rating based on how much speech they restrict. A green light, a yellow light, or a red light per policy, and then an overall rating for the school. So a green light policy would be one that restricts speech, but it restricts the kind of speech that we traditionally have accepted as an exception to absolutist free speech. So if you truly threaten someone, you come up to someone with a gun and you say your money or your life, well, yeah, you spoke the words, but what you really did is you threatened someone's life with a gun and basically said, if you don't give me this money, all of your money, I'm going to kill you or shoot you. That's not traditionally protected speech. That's an exception, a true threat. There are some other examples too that the Supreme Court has very carefully defined as pretty much never okay, knowing all the circumstances. You can't truly threaten someone. You can't truly intimidate someone, put someone in fear of their life because of what you said. And there are some other exceptions, but if the university is restricting those things, that's fine. Any judge would say, well, that's an exception, that's a kind of a green light restriction on speech. A red light policy at the other extreme clearly and substantially restricts freedom of speech, and again, 2/3 of colleges do this. And it will be a policy that restricts a wide swath of speech. It might be a civility policy. It might say, we want all of you to be civil, and if you're not friendly to one another, you're going to get punished. Purdue University Calumet actually has a yellow light version of this, which they say, we expect students to be civil to one another. And so if you're a student, you don't really know ahead of time, are they going to punish me if I say a rude thing to someone, if I tell a joke that someone takes offense at, if I engage in satire in the student newspaper or political cartoon? Well, maybe I just won't do that. And so these policies have a chilling effect on students because they read the policy, if they ever actually read the student handbook. Nobody does until they get in trouble. But pretending that they read the student handbook, they say, oh, I might actually get in trouble if I take up the wrong side on gay marriage or abortion or any controversial issue in society, because some administrator might take the other side and then get me in trouble because they say I was discourteous or uncivil in the way that I presented my view. And so you don't know how much speech didn't happen on your college campus simply because the policy is there, chilling expression. And speech codes are struck down by the courts all the time, including here in Wisconsin in the famous case. We have a professor here, Tim Schill, who wrote a whole book about campus hate speech codes and why they're unconstitutional and arguments on both sides for and against them. And it's a really important book, so if you get a chance to read it, if you haven't, make sure you read the second edition of it. I read the first edition of it by mistake. But the speech codes that are on the books actually chill expression, and they teach students that the right response to speech that you dislike is to have official punishment from the university, rather than teaching students that the good response to speech you dislike is to fight bad speech with better speech. More speech is the antidote. Now, there's another Supreme Court principle, which is that so long as there is time to avert the danger, if it's clear and present danger, someone's just about to kill someone else, you don't even have to be the police. You try to separate them, right? And then you let it get sorted out later. But so long as there is time to avert the danger, you let people say as much bad stuff as they want. The government's not going to step in and say, you have the good speech and you have the bad speech. It waits for there to be a real danger before it steps in. And that's kind of the principle that comes in for those green light policies, why it's okay for the government to step in and say, all right, certain speech is just not protected. But these red light policies are the opposite of that. They say, before we even know the context, you're just not allowed to say vulgar words over the internet. You're not allowed to send an email that denigrates or demeans someone. Well, there are a lot of cases where you might want to denigrate or demean someone, especially through satire or comedy, because it's the more polite way than directly addressing someone and telling them how much you hate their views. But also, a civility policy, like the one that was struck down at California State University in the whole CSU system, the federal judge said, civility connotes calmness and order, and that's not always the way that you want to react to an emergent situation. Sometimes you want to react with righteous anger. Sometimes you want to actually react with emotion. And you're losing a whole part of your rhetorical arsenal if you only have to be civil all the time. Besides the fact that it's so vague that nobody knows what it means. That no possible individual could decide for the rest of us what counts as courteous and civil and what doesn't. So these policies are hopelessly vague often, but also, and so you're going to have selective enforcement and double standards all the time, just because of human nature and because people can't identify all the lines. But also, you're losing a whole part of the debate if you are telling people that they can never use emotion, where they actually are showing that they're really angry at someone or that they're really upset. So if you then think back just a couple generations, why this is so important and why it cuts both ways. If you really hate the existing order because you think it's sexist or racist, and you are a suffragette or you are involved in the civil rights movement, and people are telling you, oh, you're being pretty offensive because we like our white supremacist sexist society, and your public protests are just making trouble in the community, and people are upset with you, and you're being so discourteous to our genteel society. We think you just need to be shut down. All of those social movements would not be able to get going because the majority is always the group that oppresses the minority, right? First Amendment expression or free speech is not for the views that everybody already has. It's not for the majority views that are already pretty well protected by social norms. It's for the views that are weird and unusual, and you're the first person who had the idea. You're Darwin or Galileo, or maybe just a really weird person. But you might be right. We don't know ahead of time who's going to be the Darwin, who's going to be the weirdo. So we let everybody have their chance in the marketplace of ideas, and we protect the minority views. And that changes from one generation to the next. So what's good for the goose is what's good for the gander. If you want to establish a policy where the majority gets to oppress the minority, guess what's going to happen in 40 years when you're now in the minority and you've oppressed somebody for 40 years? They're going to oppress you back. And we're starting to see this, and Jonathan Rauch again, who's an important gay rights activist, but also a really smart thinker who writes places like The Atlantic, or I forget where he writes, says this to his friends in the gay rights movement. If now that we are starting to be in the majority on gay rights issues, if we oppress those who disagree with us in the same way that we were oppressed, not only are we no better than they are from a moral perspective, but we lost the principle that we fought so hard for, of equality of different views and values. And I agree with him on that. If you set up a system where the majority gets to win, you're going to one day be in the minority, and you're going to be really sad that you set up that system. And so we set up a governmental system where the government's allowed to pretty much tell us what we can do and what we can't do in terms of conduct. All kinds of different conduct. And the Supreme Court has the individual mandate going to today, right? So can the government make us do things? Well, they can regulate an awful lot of commerce. They can make a farmer who is only going to eat the wheat that he produced burn his wheat because he produced too much wheat, because that's part of the overall commerce system. And the Supreme Court earlier had said, well, you can do that. We can make people do things or not do things an awful lot of time. If the federal government can't do it, the state governments can do it. But the one thing the government can't do is tell us what to think or what to believe or what to say, or invade our conscience, our basic humanity. And we have the First Amendment that helps protect that right. So that gives us the right, among other things, to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Right? That's one of the 5 parts of the First Amendment. It's the little known remembered part, right? But that's so important, because if the government can tell us all the things we can do and can't do, at least it gives us that last chance to say to the government, you know what, please don't make us do this or not do this. At least our thoughts are free. At least we can petition to have social change happen. So universities really should be respecting that. If there's any place that should be the freest in the country, it should be our college and university campus. You should have more rights in the university environment rather than fewer rights, because you're trying to do something different and special and maybe take your ideas back out to the regular community. Not that you're an ivory tower, but that you're doing something a little bit different. You get that extra little layer of protection. Maybe you have tenure because you need it, because you're doing some real weird sex study and the local community all hates you because you're discovering weird things about human beings and their sexuality, but your university protects you and protects your job against the social pressure of the community. And again, 40 or 50 years ago, that happened many times. And so from a policy point of view, you want your policies to be as robust as possible to protect academic freedom, to protect free speech. From a practice point of view, it doesn't matter what the policy says. If there's some administrator who wants to get you, they'll find a way to get you. So you also need kind of a culture of individual liberty, free speech and academic freedom, so that when there is an incident, when someone says something really awful, and most of the community thinks it's really awful, the first reaction is not, let's go to mommy and daddy in the administration, save us from the mean person. It's, we know how to fight bad speech with better speech. We're going to tell this person we think they said something offensive, see what they have to say for themselves. Maybe they persuade us they were right, maybe they don't. Maybe we agree to disagree, we move on. We have had the debate. John Stuart Mill said in a great little book on liberty, which Tim and I were talking about earlier, the idea that you hate might be right. But the idea that you hate might be partly right, so it's at least worth listening to because it might be partly right. But the idea that you hate actually might have some kernel of truth to it that is worth figuring out. Why did that weird person have that really weird view? He's a human being or she's a human being. There's got to be some reason they have that view. What caused that? And you want to kind of get at that little nugget of truth because there's something, you know, they're not just crazy. Maybe they're, I mean, some people are just crazy, you know, biologically crazy. But other than that, what's going, and you know, Foucault has some interesting things to say about how we determine who the crazy people are and who the normal people are. But there's got to be something, and try to work that out. But he also goes so far as to say, even if the view that you hate is totally wrong, at least it helps you understand why that view is wrong and your view turned out to be right. And so instead of holding your view as a prejudice, you actually hold that view because you know it and it's yours. Because you've tangled with error, truth won, but you actually now understand why. Right? So if you ask me to explain why the Earth is round instead of flat, I'm not really that good at it. I can still kind of, like I know enough astronomy and I could kind of point out some things and I'd really explain to you. If you ask me to explain like why that gravity is true and exists, I could probably kind of do that against the people who say there's no gravity, because first of all, I could do this and say, okay, there's gravity. You know, but you know, David Hume would say, no, all you did is you released your hand and then that fell and then it made a little noise. And you could repeat that a lot of times. Why does that prove that gravity exists? And then finally you get to a physicist and they give you an equation and they say, I can tell you exactly how fast it's going to fall. And then I do it and that's how it happens. And so then I persuade you. Or I say 2 + 2 is 4. All right, well, but if I take 2 little drops of water and 2 more drops of water and I put them together, how many drops of water do I have? I have just 1 big drop of water. So 2 + 2 isn't always 4. Right? So the context for truth matters. And so when you're really thinking about what you know and what you don't know, and you want to really know it for yourself, you want to be able to explain it to someone else. And what faculty members will sometimes say is they have no better educational experience than when they're teaching the introductory course. Because that's when they get the weird questions that their colleagues no longer ask. They get the question where they actually have to like explain what limited government is, or explain the basics of their field. And that's where they really kind of have to rethink, wait, why do I know the basics of my field? So the idea that we hate is valuable for us because it gets us back to those first questions about what we actually know. So all of that is kind of from the policy point of view. And from the practice point of view, the way that universities fail in free speech are many. So we're going to just take a little break by watching a video for about 10 minutes of 5 of FIRE's worst cases over the years. Just give us a break to see kind of in action the things that actually happen on college campuses. And as soon as you think you've seen it all, the next crazy violation happens. And so raise your hand if you can't hear it once this starts, and I'll try to fix it somehow.
It was so absurd, it didn't seem like it was occurring in America.
It was like something out of North Korea. I realized that basically I needed help. Fire responded to me thankfully.
Free speech is key to campus life.
Hi, my name is Greg Lukianoff, and I'm the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, also known as FIRE. FIRE was founded in 1999 by Alan Charles Kors and Harvey Silverglade to defend basic rights on college campuses. These rights include due process, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, and of course, freedom of speech. What you're about to see are 5 of the worst examples of abuses of student and faculty rights FIRE has seen throughout its history. And we start with a case in Indiana.
I was found guilty of racial harassment just for reading this book.
At Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, a student who was working his way through college as a janitor, Keith John Sampson never dreamed that he'd get in trouble simply for publicly reading a book.
I was ordered by my supervisor to report to the affirmative action office. I think they saw somebody who was white and had a book on the Klan, and they rushed to judgment.
This is literally a case where a university judged a book by its cover.
The book Notre Dame versus the Klan is an historical account how the Fighting Irish defeated the Ku Klux Klan. This book is definitely an anti-Klan book.
Keith John Sampson was found guilty without a hearing of racial harassment.
You cannot do this over a book. I mean, you can tell me you don't like the book, but you can't tell me I can't read it. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to turn to. I was just a tiny voice still squeaking over there in Indiana. Fire was my megaphone.
It took the combined efforts of the ACLU, FIRE, and the Wall Street Journal to get the university to back down.
Whether it's a university or a local government limiting speech, they're violating the U.S. Constitution. This is America. Always stand up for your rights in America.
The Delaware program was a program of coercion and intimidation, humiliation and indoctrination.
The University of Delaware set up an invasive orientation program for all students living in the dormitories.
My university ran an extensive and unconstitutional mandatory brainwashing program for students living on campus, all 7,000. They wanted to turn the students, to stamp a mental footprint on the consciousness of the students. When students first arrived on campus, they would have interview sessions with their RAs.
Would you date an African-American person? Would you date a Muslim? Would you be friends with a homosexual?
The RAs asked very personal, very intimate questions, like, when did you discover your sexual identity? When one female student said, it's none of your damn business, to her male RA, she was written up.
If you are homosexual, shouldn't it be your decision to let people know?
The goal of this program was essentially a modern-day public shaming.
If you believe in gay rights, you have to stand on one side of it. If you oppose gay rights, you have to stand on the other. You couldn't stay in the middle, and you couldn't explain your stand.
They tried to get rid of racism and stuff, but they just made it worse than it was in the first place.
It was a blatant violation of basic rights that students have. The right to privacy, the right to conscience. So I worked with FIRE, and we were able to get the university to suspend the program. FIRE was wonderful and indispensable in solving the problem at Delaware.
Hayden Barnes got in trouble with Valdosta State University for speaking his mind, and so the school went out of its way to expel him for absolutely nonsensical and pretextual reasons.
Valdosta State University was planning to build a pair of parking garages for $40 million using mandatory student fees. I attempted to raise discussion about the necessity of a parking garage and possible alternatives by posting flyers detailing alternative uses for $40 million. Writing letters and emails to campus leaders.
And that didn't sit well with the university president, for whom it turned out this was a pet project. As soon as Hayden began to protest the building of this parking garage through putting flyers out on campus and then ultimately publishing a letter in the student newspaper, he had a target on his back. The president of the university looked for ways to get rid of him. He looked into his background.
He told me I embarrassed him, that this could not be forgiven, and he was clearly unnerved by the fact that I disagreed with him.
And it was only later, in having people investigate Hayden's activities online, that they discovered this collage that Hayden had put sort of inadvertently on Facebook.
It poked fun at the president's pride in a parking garage, which seemed like a funny thing to me to be proud about.
And so they used that when they had no other way to go about it to try and create a pretextual reason to remove Hayden from the university. Hayden is a clear and present example of overreaching by government officials that have no ability to discern when they are violating the Constitution.
Thanks to FIRE, I'm one of the best First Amendment attorneys in the country defending my rights.
FIRE is fulfilling an essential role in trying to combat these misguided trends on campus.
I was threatened with suspension and expulsion from the university for putting a poster criticizing a professor about injustices that were going on through the community. Basically, as a social work student at the agency where I was interning at, a number of our clients were dealing with various social injustices. At the same time, the director of Baines and Housing Authority was also a social work professor at the university. He was evicting these clients, so what I did was I ended up putting posters all over campus, some on the internet and throughout the community. I got a letter and I was called in. They had informed me that I was going to be suspended. I guess I didn't know exactly where to turn. I don't have money. I couldn't afford a lawyer. FIRE responded to me, thankfully. FIRE wrote out a letter and sent it to the university. It became national news. They actually dropped every single charge, like, by the next day.
Two of my students got dragged into an investigation from a new scheme in the education department at Brooklyn College called dispositions theory. The national accrediting body, this group called NCAPE, had actually promulgated new national standards that required education programs that listed social justice as a goal, as Brooklyn did, to individually assess each student's capability to promote social justice. Education schools were using this requirement from NCAPE essentially to purge from the ranks of future public school teachers anyone who they perceived as quote-unquote conservative or insufficiently tolerant. And so I wrote an op-ed for Inside Higher Ed. After I had my op-ed published, I received a letter signed by every member of the education department at Brooklyn College telling me that because I had criticized their conduct in the dispositions cases, that I was going to be referred to this body called the Integrity Committee. I realized that basically I needed help. FIRE sent a letter to the CUNY Chancellor's office and to the Brooklyn College president. I received a phone call the next day from the General Counsel's office at CUNY informing me that I had no need to worry, that the Integrity Committee was not going to be conducting an investigation any longer. And in fact, after all was ended, the Integrity Committee ceased to exist.
The top colleges in our country can place students and their parents in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. The very least students should be able to expect is the freedom to explore ideas without any fear of punishment.
So that is just 5 out of many cases that FIRE has taken. You can go to our website and see hundreds more. If you follow the cursor, you can go to cases and issues. Today's top cases are all FIRE cases, and see lots more. And you can also go by category. And then you can search by school name if you want to see cases that have happened in the Wisconsin system. I haven't done this, but let's see what happens. You can go to each of these schools that we have graded, and you can see each one of them has a red light as a matter of policy. You click on the link and you can get to cases that we've had at all of these schools. Obviously, Stout is on the list. And we'll actually get to that when we talk about policies, so let's do that just to have it up. So we'll talk about these policies in turn when we get to it. But what you saw in the video was that, how we win our cases. We have lawyers on staff, but I'm not a lawyer, even though I run the defense program. And we don't encourage people to sue their universities because it takes a really long time. It's very expensive. You're polarizing the issue. You're not getting that engagement going with the university. And you may or may not win because now you're asking a federal judge to step in, or maybe sometimes a state judge. And instead of getting your principle out there, you're just turning to sue. And in fact, in the Hayden Barnes case, It began in the year 2007 when I was new at Fire. And he's only had part of his case litigated so far. We'll have to talk about it. So 4 years after he was expelled from Valdosta State, he's still fighting it in court. It's probably going to take 4 more years before he gets justice. Now, one of the reasons that this is such an important case is that the president of the university acted against the advice of all the rest of his staff, including the head lawyer for the entire university system of Georgia from the regions. So he, as a public official, disregarding case law, disregarding the advice from his own lawyer, not liking that he was made fun of by a student, expelled the student unilaterally. He did something that was so bad that he lost his qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is something that administrators deserve because they make 1,000 decisions a day and they make some mistakes, and sometimes those involve people's rights. They just make mistakes. And we understand that people make mistakes. That's kind of the whole point of individual liberty and tolerance for one another, is sometimes people are wrong, they make mistakes. And so if every time you make a mistake somebody can sue you, first of all, you don't want to be a government official. Second of all, it becomes very expensive for the government and very time-consuming for the courts. So what they do is they say, look, you can't sue the state unless the state has explicitly said certain particular areas where we've acted so badly a citizen can sue us. And not only that, you can't sue an individual because they have part of the state's immunity themselves. It's a qualified immunity. And you can't sue that individual unless they have acted in such a severe way, basically acting under color of state law. They violated your civil rights. And it was a clearly established legal principle so that any reasonable person in your position as that authority figure would have known that you were violating someone's rights. And that's what the president of Valdosta State University did. Let's get the lights back on.
Adam, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, is Valdosta a public institute?
They're a public university.
It seemed that the ones that you showed were all public?
IUPUI, Valdosta, Binghamton, Delaware, pretends it's partly private, but it's really bound by the Constitution too. And then Brooklyn College, yes.
Do you see a significant difference between public institutions that you come in and...
There are not many differences. In the area of speech code policy, they're both about the same. About 2/3 of colleges have unconstitutional level speech codes. Now at a private university, you don't do First Amendment analysis, you do the same kind of analysis, but from a contractual and moral point of view, because most private universities promise freedom of expression and academic freedom. Yale, for instance, a private university, says freedom of speech is our paramount obligation. Or the University of Chicago has something called the Calvin Report, which says we value academic freedom so highly that we are not even institutionally going to take a position on a controversial issue because we don't want there to be any sense that we're treating our faculty as second class if they don't agree with us. So the university so they didn't divest from South Africa, for instance, when everybody else divested from South Africa, because they said, we want to hold fast to the principle that even as a private institution, we value academic freedom so highly that we're not going to take sides. We are the home of critics, but we are not ourselves the critic. Now, private universities have the right, if they want to be Brigham Young University, be Liberty or Regent or Oral Roberts University. They have a freedom of association right to be what, or Vassar, from the left. They have a freedom of association right to say, you know what? We hold certain values higher than free speech and academic freedom. If you come to BYU and we don't indoctrinate you into Mormonism, then you should ask for your money back. You're coming here to be indoctrinated. So there's a market for that, right? And so, again, it's a free country. If that's the kind of university you want to be, it's fine. But then people look at the research that comes out of BYU and they say, well, I don't know, was it really produced under free conditions, and can I trust it as much? And this kind of brings up when you have kind of outside funders funding your research, how much of it did you do because you wanted to please the donor, and how much of it did you do because, right? And so that raises kind of interesting moral and academic questions, but as a rights issue, there's not really much of an issue there, right? You made a contract and it was transparent, everybody knows it, and so everybody knows that if you go to BYU, you're living under a speech code and a dress code, and if you have premarital sex, you get kicked off the basketball team. It's happened, right? But everybody knows, and those are the rules you live by. And when you apply at a place like Liberty or Regent, you actually have to sign the contract as soon as you apply. You say, I understand that I am applying to go to a school that's going to make me live by a certain moral code, that they're allowed to kick me out, as one school did, if I don't shake the hand of the provost as I walk by because I just didn't like him that day. The person got kicked out for being rude. What can you do? You signed the form that said you're going to be polite all the time. So the private and public situations are very different for private schools that choose not to respect free speech, but that's like 1%. All the rest of the private schools, you hold them to the same standard. And in California, except for the sectarian schools, there's a law called the Leonard Law, which forces even private institutions to provide the same level of free speech protection that the public schools do. So Stanford lost a free speech case under the Leonard Law, and they argued freedom of association. We're a private school. We can do what we want. And they lost because the law. So you can agree or disagree with that. Or you don't have to agree with the court decisions. Again, it's a free society. So right now the way it works, most of the country is schools freely, as private schools, honor freedom of speech, and they promise it. So they have a moral obligation, and also in most cases a contractual obligation to follow through with that. So we rate their speech codes too, and they're about the same as public. Also, in terms of practice, they're about the same, although sometimes you'll see a private university make this argument. We're a private school, so even though you're trying to hold us to the free speech kind of standard, we can make up our own definitions of terms. So what you think is harassment is okay, but we get to make up our own definition of harassment over here. Or what you think is intimidation, and the Supreme Court said that's what it is. Well, actually, even though we never told you before, this is the definition we're going to apply today. And so that's not really okay either. Because you need to, as a due process principle, you need to have ample warning of what you're allowed to say and do ahead of time so that you know with intent that you did it and that you deserve to get in trouble, and a reasonable person would know it too. So we also get into all the due process issues. So in the Hayden Barnes case at Valdosta State, going back, the president lost his qualified immunity in court because the court said any reasonable person would have known that you can't just expel somebody because you don't like his views because he's making fun of you with no notice and no hearing, and then after he actually proves that he's not a danger to the campus, you still don't let him come back. But again, it took us 4 years to get the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals to say yes. And they left the door open because if after the hearing, the president comes up with some new argument for qualified immunity, he can still raise that again. So it's going to take probably 4 more years, and he'll probably be deceased, and I think that's what he's hoping for, before this resolves. And he or his estate, won't be liable. Although I don't know the law and exactly how that works. So why don't we go through, I actually have so many more fun stories to tell faculty and students who have had their rights violated. Let me just do 1 or 2 more, and then we'll go to the Stout's policies. And then we'll have lots of time for Q&A, and I can tell more stories too. So here's a reverse example of the parking one from University of Georgia. I actually have 2 University of Georgia stories, and then we'll move on. So one is University of Georgia was actually trying to do the environmental thing and encourage more students to take their scooters to campus rather than driving their cars. But what they didn't do is provide enough scooter parking. So this one graduate student writes an email to parking services. They have a parking website, and you just write parking at uga.edu. And they, on their website, they say, we're so thankful to have all of your feedback, positive and negative. And I don't know how many people actually write positive feedback to parking services. Like, I found parking again today, thanks so much. They're probably used to getting negative feedback. So this graduate student sends them an email, and it goes something like this. When you're going to provide parking outside Adderhole, the building where I go to take my classes, are you going to do this before I effing graduate or before the sun runs out of hydrogen? Thanks for nothing ever. And he used the F word in full. Since I might be on YouTube, this time I'll not say it. And so pretty soon after that, it might even be the same day, he gets an email back from parking services saying, your email has been sent to the campus judiciary. So he sends an email back saying, I can't take that as a no on the parking. A few weeks later, he gets a formal letter from the dean charging him with a bunch of infractions including disrupting parking services with his threatening email. So again, they make up their own idea of what counts as disruption, what counts as a threat. What did he threaten to do? Take the hydrogen out of the sun? It wasn't threatening. It wasn't disruptive. And they asked for negative feedback. And you're allowed to swear. It's not against the law to swear, even to a government official or even to the police. So that's the kind of case that resolves really quickly. And the way we win is we don't try to sue the school. We send a letter. We say to the university president, did you know that parking services and your dean of students have just violated the students' rights? Here's the facts of the case. Real easy documentation, right? Because there's just 3 emails. So, let us know if you think we're wrong, because we might be wrong. There might be some other part of the story, but if there isn't, you have really violated this person's rights. Please fix it in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then let us know what you've done. That works 9 times out of 10. The reason it works is because the public will not stand for a violation of individual rights if you make it really clear that that's happened. A university won't get away with a rights violation in public that it has tried to get away with in private. If it thinks it can get away with it in private, it might, try it for a while. But once the public finds out and you get national or international attention, like Stout did in your case, things change quickly. Because the university doesn't want that national press release, and the university president doesn't want that national press release saying, University of X hates free speech, violated this person's rights. All he tried to do was get extra scooter parking, which he actually did very shortly after they provided more parking. Instead, you want the national press release, which is President X loves free speech. Some administrator made a mistake, it happens, but he solved the problem. Free speech is now safe at our university. And and Stout's eventual solution kind of was that, right? In the Miller case, some important hiccups at first. You get the national and international press, you get the reversal, and then you get a lecture series on free speech and academic freedom. And responsibility part is there too, just to kind of say that there's 2 sides. But actually turning the problem situation into a positive situation is what you want to see, right? And so you're not on that list of the 12 worst colleges in America for free speech, but you could have been, right? Because you could have been one of those schools that says, you know what, we don't want to back down. And we have a bunch of schools that are like that. So yeah, we're in federal court, but we're going to keep fighting it. Yeah, we got negative international attention, like Oakland University did for a really unusual case, the Hot for Teacher case. You can read about it. But we still don't like this student so much that we're going to keep fighting and keep him off campus because we think he's just a jerk for expressing in his writing journal that he was attracted to his writing professor, even though the writing professor said, you can write about anything you want. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic story. And it made international news because it has the Hot for Teacher angle, it has the Van Halen angles, now that Van Halen's coming back. So let me just tell you the other University of Georgia story. The Red and Black is a great student newspaper, which actually is willing to sue the school under the Freedom of Information Act law to get information. And one of the things they got, maybe now 2 years ago, was they found that the residence life folks had passed a policy where if anyone sees something that might be offensive in the residence halls, like on the dorm room door and the whiteboards, if you have to call the police in, the police have to come, they have to wipe off the whiteboard after taking a photo of it, they have to investigate, and that this gets written up as a police report. And the truth of it is that the Red and Black actually got about 8 of the police reports. So it actually happened many times. University of Delaware, the Res Life program in the video, had the same kind of policy. And this is, again, the kind of policy that once you expose it, it disappears really fast because it's the real speech police. They actually come, knock on your door and say, did you write that thing on this other person's door? And we know, and you can imagine what freshmen write on the whiteboards to other freshmen in the dorms. It's not the highest value of political speech, but that's not the government's choice. The government doesn't get to decide what's the high value and the low value and the no value speech, except when you get way out to obscenity, which has to meet certain strict requirements. So, it'll be something like someone wrote, welcome to Boggs' 3rd floor, and someone else changed the word Boggs into boobs. Police have to be called. Might be offensive, right? Another person drew a picture of a penis and it said fire crotch and there's like fire coming out of it. So really not high value political speech. But again, it's not the government's choice. And it reminds me of bias incident policy. I think you guys might have one here. Where you kind of have a bias response team that springs into action immediately to make sure that the person who's been offended is safe and secure. and not offended anymore, and that we're addressing the issue and showing that we care about people not having their feelings hurt. Maybe that's not the way your bias incident response team works here, but maybe it is. And again, what does that teach students? So you have a campus-wide email go out to all the 5 Claremont colleges. Someone wrote on another student's whiteboard, "I like rice," and she was an Asian American student. Big email goes out to everyone, and the investigation kind of starts to happen, and it turns out the woman wrote it on her own whiteboard. She likes rice, and she's, you know, you're allowed to say funny things about yourself, or even about other people, and it's okay. Anyway, so we just have so many stories, but we just have to stop with the stories. Let's talk about policies. We'll just do them in order. So we'll also try to make it bigger. Can everybody in the back see this now, or is it still not good enough? Oh, no.
Can you just ask one quick question before
Yes.
you move into policies? Do you see a correlation? Do you see, with the increase in reports coming to fire, there's been a lot of press about bullying and hate speech and harassment, not just at college campuses, but K-12, et cetera, et cetera. Are you seeing a direct correlation increase?
In cases, not yet.
Okay.
It's mainly considered a K-12 issue, although in New Jersey, the anti-bullying law covers colleges too. And it's blatantly unconstitutional, and the first time they go after a college student, fire will step in, there'll probably be a lawsuit because you've got to get a state law overturned, and the state will lose, if it's a good and clean case. But mainly it's been K-12, and it's kind of a new thing, and so it's, right now they're more in the level of laws and not in the level of kind of really zero tolerance, stepping up enforcement. But the definition of bullying is all over the map, and it's usually going to be unconstitutional. If it really means I'm going to beat you up for your lunch money, we already had laws for that. They're called assault, they're called threats, intimidation. You didn't really need a new law for bullying. It's just that people, it's the latest fad, right? We have to do something about a big problem. And it's not that the problem didn't exist before, and it's not that the law didn't already stop bullies from being bullies. It's that it was the enforcement probably not happening, or people not knowing. But anyway, we don't get involved in K-12 very much, so we're not really seeing a lot. And universities have not passed very many bullying policies yet, although we're starting to see some. But again, the first time that someone gets punished under a bullying policy, it's going to be adjudicated very similarly to the way they address discriminatory harassment policies. And in 1999, the Supreme Court of the United States, in a fundamental case called Davis v. Monroe County Board of Education, defined student against student harassment in the educational context in such a way that, and again, you can read Tim Schill's book, it really helps you see like some of the arguments on both sides of the hate speech issue. How do you protect people from harassment that's actually harassment? And how do you fully protect free speech at the same time? So you may or may not agree with the definition that the Supreme Court came up with. We think it's pretty good, that it does a great job of protecting people from actual harassment, and it protects people's free speech as fully as it can, up to the point at which someone is actually engaging in conduct rather than simply speech. That has the effect of giving someone a discriminatory educational experience. And that definition, in the educational context, between peers, which is where students are 24 hours a day on many campuses where they eat and sleep and study. So it's not like the employment environment. It's a different kind of environment. So you don't want to use the EEOC employment standard for students against other students. It's got to be conduct, not just speech. So that's kind of first of all. Now, speech can become conduct, like intimidation or true threats or harassment. So if I phone you up every night at 3 a.m. and I say, "Hey, Tim, you're a great professor. I've read your book. Keep up the good work." And maybe the first time you say thank you, but it's 3 a.m. And then I call you up the next night at 3 a.m. and say, I just stay up late. And you say, it's great that you really think I wrote a good book, but please stop calling me at 3 a.m. And then I do it the third time, and then the fourth time, and then you start to lose sleep because you're always worried, oh, is Adam going to call me again at 3 a.m.? I'm getting to the point where I'm actually harassing you, even though I'm saying things that are not offending you. I'm not being offensive, but my speech has become conduct. So first of all, it's got to be speech that becomes conduct. And so the Supreme Court has defined that kind of conduct as it has to be severe, it has to be pervasive, and it has to be objectively offensive, and it has to be subjectively offensive to the victim. And in order for it to be discriminatory, it has to be targeting the victim because of their demographic being a protected class. And it has to be bad enough in all of those ways that it actually gives you the discriminatory effect, so that you feel like you don't want to go to class, and then you actually, a reasonable person wouldn't go to class because the person next to them is always like, I don't know, shooting rubber bands at them, like I had happened to me in high school, right? So, you know, because of who you are. If it's not discriminatory harassment, it might still be harassment because it's based on something other than being on a protected class, and the university probably should not carve out special exceptions. Well, because they did it to you because you were black, it was harassment, but because they did it to you because you wear glasses, it's not. I would feel that it's better to have a definition that fits everyone. So it's targeting you because of who you are. It's focused on you. Severe enough, pervasive, objectively offensive, subjectively offensive to the victim, which means that, you know, I'm actually harassed. Not just you and your friends tell a lot of dirty jokes, and, you know, a normal person looking in would say, wow, if I were in that situation, I would just find that intolerable. And maybe that person's just telling other jokes because they feel like they need to fit in. But if I'm doing it, if I'm the one, and I'm not doing it to fit in, but I like to tell dirty jokes too, then I haven't been harassed. I'm actually participating voluntarily, under no coercion at all. So it's got to be objectively and subjectively offensive. It also has to be severe and pervasive enough, you kind of can't avoid it, and it's bad enough that you have that discrimination. And that's what the Supreme Court gave us as the definition in 1999. I think it works really well. And if the university administration, you can actually say, guess what? The Supreme Court told us what the definition is. We're safe, right? So we're just following the rules that were laid down by other people who are, if we end up going to court, other courts will honor this definition. So if we follow it and we don't violate someone's free speech because it wasn't severe enough, or so long as we're being careful not to violate people's free speech and protect people from actual harassment, we've done our job. If either side sues us, we're safe. And that's what you want to have. And you don't even have to have a lot of extra conversation about it if you're the administration from a legal point of view, or a risk management point of view. You're done. Now you still have to have all the rest of your conversations from an ethical point of view, because you might disagree with the Supreme Court. You might say, well, actually, you know, the severe standard isn't good enough because, you know, if I might still have the discriminatory experience from things that are not very severe, but those microaggressions all eventually add up to the hostile environment. And I want to make a case for a different standard. And that's, again, why we have petition for redress of grievances. But until you actually get that changed, you're not going to be able to persuade the university to violate someone's free speech because of microaggression. It's just not going to happen. Because if they do, they're going to get sued. And you actually have courts now saying a university failing to act to violate someone's free speech is good. You don't want the university to act to violate someone's free speech. So if you try to sue the school saying you were discriminatorily harassed, and the school didn't have a reason to address the harassment because there wasn't harassment, you're good. So this is why you have some yellow and red light policies at Stout that we rate that don't match the Supreme Court's Davis standard because they actually go too far on the side of restricting free speech. So here, this is much more like the EEOC employment standard being applied to students. And that's why we give it a yellow light. It could very easily be misused or abused to punish protected speech. So it looks pretty good from an employment point of view overall, but it has this language of purpose or effect. And in the Third Circuit, they said purpose or effect isn't good enough for student against student free speech. If you have the purpose of harassing someone, but you don't have the effect of harassing them, the school doesn't have to step in because you didn't actually have harassment happen. Now, I think that's a little bit weird, but that's the way the courts have gone. And that's one of the reasons that this is a yellow light policy. But more importantly, where is your severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive? Instead, what you have is the EEOC standard of severe, persistent, or pervasive, which again you can agree or disagree with. But you know, again, the Davis standard is severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. The EEOC is severe, persistent, or pervasive. We go from and to or. and you lose, well, you still have the reasonable person standard, so that's good. You've got objective and subjective. But, so it's a yellow light. A court will probably find it unconstitutional, but it's not clearly and substantially restricting so much speech that there's a real danger to free speech on the campus. Just walking around campus, someone might get in trouble for having the wrong view on women in the military or gay marriage or some other issue. This is going to have a chilling effect, but not a severely one, chilling effect. Similarly, in the Residence Hall Handbook, there are 2 harassment policies that are near each other. This one says, harassing behavior regardless of the method is prohibited. Where's the rest of the definition? How do you know what you're allowed to say and not allowed to say? Where's severe, persistent, pervasive, objective? All the rest of that is not there. And again, materials that create a hostile environment for living, working, or learning are prohibited. Pretty vague, probably overbroad. So that are just not allowed to read certain books. And again, all the rest of the definition is not there. So what we often see is a university might even have a green light sexual harassment policy. And the ideal is to have one for the employment context and one for the educational context. And then you might even have separate ones for the academic environment of the classroom, because certain things that you shouldn't ever say in the chemistry classroom, you should say in the anatomy classroom, right? Because you're in a different, you're teaching different material, and you should be allowed to talk about people's private parts in the anatomy class. I don't see where that's going to fit in chemistry, but it might also fit in the literature class. We actually have a professor at University of Denver who was teaching about the drug war, and he had a section on taboos, and he talked about sexual taboos as well as drug taboos in society. And a couple students complained, and the person who was the head of the school said, well, in the employment context, all of this conversation would be harassment, so it's harassment in your classroom too. So you're out for 6 months. And it was a private school at the University of Denver, and so it's been hard to kind of get them to undo it, especially because the head of the school is Chris Hill, the former US ambassador to Iraq, who didn't really have a lot of academic background, I think, and didn't quite get his responsibilities. They probably didn't want to mess with Chris Hill and tell him that he was wrong for getting rid of a faculty member for 6 months. So it's a little bit complicated. We're not really sure what all the behind-the-scenes stuff is about. But you probably want to have different policies for in the classroom or the academic context, one for the employment context, and then one for the student-against-student context. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it's not unclear so long as people know what context they're in. Right? When you're in the library, you know you're in a special environment where you can't yell. That's not that hard to know. So you know when you're in the classroom, and you know when you're somewhere else, a public area of campus. So what I would have residence life folks do is say, if they want to say sexual harassment is not permitted, say, to find the definition of sexual harassment so that you know what to do and not do, go over to the student handbook where you'll find the good definition. Instead, if all you're reading is the Residence Hall Handbook, you don't know. And you also don't know what your RA has been trained to see as harassment. So now you're really chilling your expression, because your RA might be one of those people at University of Georgia or Delaware where they're trained to give you demerits or kick you out of housing after the 3rd time you say some offensive thing. And we have people complain to us about their RAs all the time. There's this whole extra system of justice that is not the campus judiciary that the faculty certainly don't know about, and administrators often don't even know about. So there's a real danger there. Now, you also have, which is not your fault, a UWS policy. I suppose it's from UWS 17. This is very similar to the one that was actually struck down by a federal court. And basically it says discriminatory attitudes are banned across the whole UW system. And then you can read all the rest of it if you want. Name calling, racial slurs, jokes. Again, the right to say it is very different from whether it's moral to say it. So everyone in this room, and I'm not going to presume, might think that name calling, racial slurs, and jokes about someone's race are really unethical and bad. So you fight bad speech with better speech. You don't call on the University of Wisconsin system to punish people for having discriminatory attitudes, blatantly, severely unconstitutional. But hard for Stout to do anything about because you didn't write it. Here's your civility policy. Disorderly conduct is not permitted, so that's like a catch-all. If we don't like what you're doing, it's just disorderly conduct. Using abusive language so as to disturb the public peace. Well, it's a yellow light because if you actually disturb the public peace, well, you've actually committed some kind of disorderly conduct. But it could very easily be abused because I could say, look, you called me a jerk because you don't like my views on something. Now the RA comes in and says you disturb the public peace, right? Because it says using abusive language, right? So if I'm actually using abusive language to the point of threatening or intimidating you, that's one thing. But anyway, so hopefully you can see why we give that one a yellow light. And here's another one, UW-Stout 18. If you have the intent to offend someone, you're not allowed to send a message by email that uses profane language. Like the University of Georgia student who wrote to parking services. He probably did intend to offend parking services, and he intended to use the F word, and he used email to do it. Oh my goodness. Banned at UW-Stout. So again, it's not that the people who wrote the policy are trying to be bad people or crack down on or be tough on crime necessarily or intentionally violate people's rights. Most of the time, people who write these policies are trying to do a good thing. They think they're helping our campus community be nice and friendly and civil. But my argument, not just the legal argument, is that's the opposite of what you want at a university. Right? You want people to feel free to make mistakes, to make social mistakes, to be rude to one another, so that they can learn not to be as rude, not under pain of punishment, but under a system of education where someone comes up to them and says, hey, stop being so rude and stop being so much of a jerk. Did you just call me the F word over email? And yeah, what's wrong with that? Yeah, I guess it's not so bad. And then it's resolved. You don't have to have a big campus judiciary thing here or chill speech. Anyway.
Sorry to ask yet another question. We're a polytech. A number of our students are working while they're here in school. Do you have suggestions? So I appreciate your comment about context and making sure it's clear what context they're in. What are some strategies, what are some suggestions? So we have students that are, they're at their jobs where they have very strict policies around speech, around behaviors, et cetera, that we can't control, obviously. And then they come back here and they're in classroom, they're in residence hall. And I guess I'm struggling. What message do we send to students? Here while you're at Stout, this is the way it is. But when you move on into your professional career, or while you're concurrently balancing this concurrent career, how do we keep a balance so that we're doing the right thing here and cultivating that academic freedom, but meanwhile they have these professional standards that they're also living.
Yes. So it's important to remember that we're all human beings and we're all citizens kind of first, and then we're in the employment context secondarily, right? And that you're doing something special and unusual when you're in the college environment, right? So just like when you go to the library, it's not that hard to know you're somewhere different, where you go to the theater and everybody's annoyed at you with your crackly candies, right? Everybody knows that they go to different environments where the rules are different. I don't think there's anything difficult about that. So you see this most often kind of in the professional schools where they say, you are going to become a doctor, and so whenever you're wearing the white coat, you should be kind of acting like a doctor. But when you're in class, that's something different. When you're out in the public areas of campus and just a regular student or citizen, you're something else. You're not wearing the coat. And so again, I think we need to give people credit for understanding that those differences are real, and that what you say to your parents and what you say to your kids is different from what you say to your friends at the bar. We all know that there are different environments. So I don't think it's a hard question, actually. But it's a good question because you want people to be able to really identify, when I'm on the job, I'm on the job, right? And there's a lot of personal views I have about all kinds of things, which I almost never reveal when I'm acting as Spire's representative. Because I don't want anyone to say, you only defended or didn't defend that person because of your views, which I never do. And we are completely diverse as an organization in terms of religion and politics. And every week when we get around to the defense program cases in the table, we put all of our personal views aside, except our views about free speech, which fortunately coincide with FIRE's view most of the time. And we say, all right, what did this person say? What happened to them? And did it violate their rights? And can we document it, and are there complicating circumstances? And if someone's rights are violated, we help them. If it's Bill Ayers, if it's David Horowitz, if it's someone who hates David Horowitz and Bill Ayers, right? Doesn't matter. Now, what we do on the public side, makes a difference too, because the public will want to defend someone's rights, but if it's a really creepy or awful person, they're not going to actually send an email. They're going to say, yeah, stinks that the university did it to that awful person, but I'm not going to try to help them. But the really principled people still will, right? Because they care about the principle more than they care about the person who's a jerk. And our long-term donors are like that too. Like every time we take a case that has a public face to it, we pick up some donors who like the speech of the person whose speech was punished. But then we defend somebody on the other side, and they're like, hey, I thought you were a liberal organization, or I thought you were a conservative organization. And we turned out to be neither, and they're like, well, I'm going to stop supporting you. We say, okay. But the long-term donors will help us, continue to help us because they're in it for the principle. Let's skip the rest of this because time is short. But here's another red light policy. No offensive messages about hair color. Guys, come on. We're at the end here on color as well. So here's your bias-sensitive policy. The part that's really making this yellow is this last sentence. So you might do something that's not a crime, but we might punish you anyway. And especially when you combine that with all of your other unconstitutional policies, that's not good. You've got a yellow light. So we'll finish this up in less than 7 minutes, or less than 7%.
Adam,
yes.
I have a question on the policies. This has been just really eye-opening for me, but I know we run all of this by system of legal people whenever we make a policy, and often they do indicate we've had in our policies, from the policies at system which are crafted by lawyers. Do they not know this, or is their approach going to be, well, let's just wait until somebody sues us? Or? Well,
the incentives are often that way, the latter. Because if you get sued for violating someone's First Amendment rights, they win nominal damages of like $1 plus attorney's fees, which if it gets resolved really quickly are pretty low. If you get sued for sexual harassment, you could end up paying millions of dollars. And so the incentives are such that if you have to choose between the free speech side and the sexual harassment side, you're like, well, let's just take our chances. So the risk management side really is not healthy for free speech. And so you need a culture of individual rights saying that, look, let's just say you do what the Supreme Court said we should do, and that way we won't get sued from either side, and plus we'll match the mission of a great university which actually cares about academic freedom and free speech first in an environment in which everyone actually is truly safe.
Thank you.
Sometimes it'll be a university attorney who doesn't know the First Amendment very well, because an attorney has to deal with 100 different kinds of issues, not just First Amendment. And they just actually don't know. But we work cooperatively with schools. This is the non-cooperative one for students. This is how you sue your school over speech code. But we also have one for administrators called Correcting Common Mistakes in Campus Speech Policies, which is the cooperative way which we prefer to work. We say, look, you guys just make mistakes, here's how to fix them. And we actually want every school to go from red light to green light, and we'll be really happy to work with you and get that to happen. And even if you can not get the system-wide policies changed, maybe you can even help us advocate for them, because you don't want to be the school that gets sued and say, well, we only did it because the system made us. That's not going to help you in court. We just have to put up the Stout poster just so you can see what if you don't remember what they were. So, we also put up all the documentation for each case so people can read for themselves and make their own judgment. So we have a blurb about the case, and we have case materials. And if you go down to the bottom of the case materials, you get to blog entries and kind of press about the case. In this case, there's an awful lot of it. Just, a huge amount. So So here's the first thing that got flagged and got sent to the threat assessment team, is this guy. On the bottom is this quote from this TV show, pilot episode of Firefighter, popular in some circles TV show. You don't know me, son, so let me explain this to you once. If I ever kill you, you'll be awake, you'll be facing me, and you'll be armed. That's all it said outside a professor's office door. Someone complained, I guess, and somebody said, well, it has the word kill in it. That must be a threat. And so then, to make a long story short, the professor who's also in this room puts up a second poster. Complaining about what happened to the first poster. Fascism can cause blunt trauma, and or violent death, keep fascism away from children and pets. And there's violence in the poster. All right, so not a true threat. Are you going to feel threatened if you walk by a professor's door and see the first or the second poster? Or even in context, you see the first poster and then you see the second poster a couple days later? You're just not going to feel threatened about that, unless there's some larger part of the story that this is some small piece of. So again, we write the letter and we say, is there more to the story? Because it sure looks like someone's rights have been severely violated here. So, you know, the good news is that I think in your new protocols that you're developing and voting on soon, you actually are using the actual definition of a true threat. If you're going to have a threat assessment team, hopefully those people are trained to know the definition. And in what I've read so far, you actually have a rule at the beginning, which is that if the conduct or speech that's complained of, even if it were true, still wouldn't be a threat. That's the end. Even if it were true, it wouldn't be a threat, and you're done. So if there's a prima facie case to be made for there being no case, you're done. Right? And then you probably also shouldn't keep a database. That's like when the FBI keeps a database on you just in case. Right? So I would rather there not be kind of a threat assessment database where if you slam the door on someone or you have an argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend, your conduct goes in the database because, uh-oh, you might do that again or it might escalate. No, wait until, again, our system is you wait until the bad thing happens and then you address it. But isn't there some movie about how you try to predict ahead of time who's going to commit the crime, then you stop them ahead of time from committing the crime? That's not the civilization that we actually live in, right? So long as there is time to avert the danger, you let things play out. When there is not time to avert the danger, you can step in, and you can even exclude someone from campus on an emergency basis with no notice and no hearing. But then you've got to give them their post-deprivation hearing to find out if you actually did the right thing on an emergency basis or not, as soon as possible. So you can still keep your campus safe. You also don't have to put everything in a big database of people who might be a little creepy or might be a little scary. They wear a hoodie. You know, they wear a hooded sweatshirt, so they might be bad. So, I feel like you guys are going in the right direction, you know, in resolving, taking something that was just a big mistake and turning it around and making it something valuable. So that's been our 90 minutes. Feel free to get up and go, or there's still good food and drink in the background. But we set this up as a 2-hour event, so ask any question you want. Criticism is good and important. I got really good questions yesterday because there's a professor who a lot of students really dislike because of his expressed views about Muslims, and they're trying to figure out what can we get this professor because they really don't like him. The faculty don't like him, and the students don't like him, and they ask really good questions. And so I'm not going to give them a roadmap for how to like punish some professor. Well, if you just interpret this way. But you know, good questions and hard questions, trying to draw the lines more carefully, or disagreements are what I like to hear. Yes.
I have a question. I suppose it's not so much about speech, but students' liberties and their actions. Recently, UW-Stout, in the last couple of years, banned both smoking tobacco products and chewing tobacco products on campus for students' personal use. Although you could maybe make the argument that smoking tobacco might have a negative effect on others around you, it's really tough to make that same case about chewless tobacco. And I'm wondering if there's really any legal basis on which they can do that. I tried to talk to campus officials, And they made the cop-out that the student senate passed this as a way to control student behavior, so this is not our deal.
All right, so first of all, I have to take my fire hat off because we're not talking about free speech kinds of individual rights.
Okay.
So now we're talking just Adam Kissel talking about, right? And I'm not a lawyer, and I can't give legal advice. But first of all, you do have that First Amendment right to petition government for redress of grievances to say, I think you're violating our rights. Then where might you go with that? You might say, I have a right to privacy. I'm allowed to put in my own body what I want, and that includes chewless tobacco, whatever you call it. So that might be the angle you take. You might also say, the government doesn't get to tell me what I have to do or not do to be healthy. You might kind of make that individual rights argument. But insofar as what you do affects other people, you have to try to figure out how you're going to challenge the argument back to you, which is, well, at least on the smoking side, my smoke does at least annoy other people, even if there's no health issue that's debated and debatable for sure. But it is annoying to smell someone else's cigarette smoke, so there's that. So there is some ethical issue involved. So you have to be able to overcome some of that. And at the end of the day, the school gets to tell you what conduct is okay and not okay, with very few exceptions, like on the level of speech and conscience. All the rest, the school gets to tell you what to do. So at the end of the day, the school gets to tell you what to do, right? But you can try to make your case from a privacy or a health point of view. And then, at the end of the day, you always have right of exit, right? Especially if it's a published policy ahead of time. I don't like policies that change immediately because you're a smoker for whatever reason, and then tomorrow, or if you're a sophomore and then suddenly as a junior, the rules change, and you thought you contracted for an education that would be X, and now it's a little bit different. So I don't like that. And so what I would rather have is like something that's phased in, or that they advertise it years ahead of time and say in 2014, this is going to be, so you know ahead of time coming in, so you don't have to go through the hard process of transferring, because you still could transfer, right? There's part of the book that comes after Plato's Apology, Plato's the Credo. Socrates is going to be killed, and Credo comes to him and says, let's break you out of jail before you have to kill yourself with a hemlock. And Socrates says, well, what are the laws going to say to me if I just, at the end of my long life, I say, I followed you all this time, and now at the end of the day, at the end of my life, I'm going to break you and just leave. You could have left any time. You knew what the laws were. If you're convicted of X, the punishment could be death, and now you're punished. But at the end of the day, you decide you don't like the laws after all, and you're going to break them and just run away. What good are the laws if you're just going to break them? And so it's an interesting dialogue that Socrates has with Credo about, you actually have to follow the laws, and if you don't, it's civil disobedience. And sometimes nonviolent civil disobedience has its place. But you also have to remember that you're choosing to break the law, and you deserve the punishment for doing it. So another option for you could be, let's have a smoke out, and we're all going to smoke together and show how it's actually not so bad. And then you get punished for it, and then maybe your nonviolent civil disobedience persuades the people in charge. Probably won't. But does that help? Kind of you see where some of these issues fall?
A little bit.
A little bit. Question in the front?
Yeah, actually, it's sort of a follow-up to Elizabeth's question. As you know, we're both involved with the Ethics Center on campus, and so we often work with faculty and departments, and one of the things we're seeing in departments is a greater interest in having students understand the professional standards that apply to members of their profession. And some of those are ethical standards, and some of them involve attitudes, and some of them involve kinds of things you are allowed to say or not say in your workplace. And often, as they try to inculcate those standards, professional standards into their students, they're not the same standards that fit the campus environment. And so I understand your point about there's this context and that context. Context matters. But I'm not sure a lot of the people involved in that process understand that.
Yeah.
And so it can be difficult to try and persuade faculty members who don't want certain people in their professions and who would be violating professional standards to say, well, it's okay for you to say that in this classroom, because for their mind, that's not training them to be the professional they need to be.
Yeah.
How do you work with faculty to negotiate that?
Well, we see social work students get expelled and School of Education students get expelled simply for expressing the wrong view on some ethical issues that seem to violate the ethical norm of their profession. Even if they say, well, in real life, when I'm actually with the client, I'm going to be totally professional, but actually I believe that it's okay to hit a student. It's okay for the parent to hit the student. I would never do that as a teacher, but you know, you can slap them once in a while. And they'll get expelled for that. Because they'll say you don't have the right disposition to be a teacher. Or if you say, I actually don't think all students should be in the integrated classroom. I think we should actually have the smart kids over here and the special needs kids over here. And they might get expelled for that. So it's really problematic. Because if you go to a school that has an integrated classroom, you can't really say to the kids, oh, you're too dumb, you really shouldn't be in my class. And you probably shouldn't ever say that. But it's okay to say that behind the scenes or to your friends and to your colleagues. You know, I have a bunch of dumb kids in my class and I have a bunch of smart kids in my class. I really wish we could separate them out and give them the training that they really need. So the problem is significant, and the courts have started to get in on it. In Georgia and in Michigan, there are social work students who were expelled, and it's hard. Now, for the classroom, it gets even harder because every classroom is different. Some of them are really like a practicum, where you're really acting like the professional in class. And in some of them, it's meant to be a discussion class, where anything goes, anybody can talk about anything. And I think the rule needs to be, from a due process point of view, from the professor, all right, when you're in my class, there are special classroom rules. We're all going to act like professionals here. And it's your class, so you get to make the rules. And then when you go out to the green spaces of campus, the professor's rules don't count anymore. And the whole School of Education's rules for professionalism don't count anymore. Because you're back to being a student and a citizen. So long as the rules are clear, you shouldn't really have problems. What you can't do is and we actually had a case at UC Davis School of Medicine. The civility policy that was similar to the one that was ruled unconstitutional was taken up by the medical school with disciplinary force. And they said you have to be nice to each other all the time. And a student wrote on a listserv about how he was having a party and there was going to be a lot of alcohol. And a snitch from the second year class, who was on the first year class listserv, said, I think it's unprofessional to mention all the alcohol you're having at your party. And he writes back to her, hey, back off, mind your own business. He gets written up for being uncivil because they want the professionalism standard to be in every interaction among med students, wherever they might be, in person or by email. And that's just not okay. You can't force someone to live 24 hours a day by the professional standards unless they're like the university president. You know, when you become enough of a public figure, the rules again kind of change because you're always representing the university even when you're not. I mean, you just always are. So if you're the president of the United States and you want to have some private time with your family and someone hears something that you said, I mean, you really lost all of your privacy, basically. It's not healthy for that person, but that's kind of the way our culture has gone. But the more senior you are, the flip side of that is the more ability you have to use the power of the press to fix a problem. If someone says, well, something that's false about you, you actually can respond to that. But if you're a private citizen, you have your highest level of privacy, your highest level of First Amendment protection, and your lowest level of presumption that you ever speak for the university just because you happen to be on campus. As you were saying, Elizabeth, about the case in Canada, you're not representing the university simply by being a student. You're representing yourself. And no one would ever think that all of the students on campus represent the university because they're all different and diverse. And the college Democrats and the college Republicans and the Libertarians and the Democratic Socialists cannot all represent these universities' political views. They just can't. And so this is what happened at Sam Houston State University with their social media policy. They said if you're using the letters SHSU you're representing in your school name, I mean in your group name, like the SHSU College Democrats or the Sam Houston State Libertarians. As soon as you use SHSU, you're representing the university, and we get to have your social media passwords. And we can edit and delete your content. So the first time in the history of the world, the Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and Democratic Socialists all agree on something was they didn't like this policy. Yes?
I kind of actually segued into it very well. I was wondering if you could give your weigh-in on the ongoing debate regarding social networking sites and employer relations. So where employers are requesting access to employees, and then where it luckily hasn't made it to this university, but some universities are requesting that they know who instructors are friends with, and then saying whether or not they can be friends with students and what they can share with those students.
Yeah, so there are a few different issues there. One is you have a privacy interest in lots of the kinds of information you put on a place like Facebook. And you have a privacy expectation, and not only that, Facebook actually has rules like standards of use so that you don't actually give your password to other people. You're not allowed to. So there's those privacy issues, there's the legal issues that the school is actually telling you, or your employer is telling you to break the use policy, and which also might be a felony, by the way. There's a great book written by one of FIRE's founders called 3 Felonies a Day. The laws are so vague and broad that probably all of us commit 3 felonies every day. And it gives huge discretion to prosecutors. Show me the man and I'll show you the crime, kind of thing. So there's a privacy issue, there's the legal issue, there's the moral issue, and then there's the doctrine of unconstitutional conditions. So that if it's a public employer or the public university, they can't say, as a condition of having a generally available benefit, you have to give up certain rights. And that's what I think would be another direction you would go. Now, what gets a little bit more complicated is when it's something optional, like you become an athlete, and the school says, you know what, we're putting so much money into you as the senior athlete on our basketball team that we actually have a no texting rule and a no Twitter rule, and you have to give us your Facebook password because we want to make sure that we know ahead of time anything you say that might put us in a negative light, because you actually pretty much all the time, like the university president, are representing us. And if you don't like that, you don't have to be on the team. But if you want the scholarship and you want us to give you free transportation to all of your football games or basketball games, and you want all the other things that come with being on the basketball team, then you have to play by our rules. And so that gets a lot more complicated. So we've kind of stayed out of the specific cases of athletes and social media, but for any regular person, and probably in the employment context too, I would go for the unconstitutional condition, saying you're not allowed to make a student give up his rights simply because you want to spy on his Facebook to see if he's going to say something bad that hurts the university's reputation, even if he's going to also be on work study or working in a library or something. Because certain kinds of roles maybe would be different. And I forget the end of your question. You had something slightly different.
It's about some universities have requested that they be able to control who instructors become friends with.
Oh yeah, so there's a law that was proposed in Missouri where high school teachers weren't allowed to be friends with their high school students, or maybe, I think, any student. And there's a freedom of association right involved, and sometimes a parent is friends with their own child who's a student, right? And so it was just overbroad. And so there might be some legitimacy, but it's probably not very legitimate to have such a broad law. And I think what Representative Cunningham finally was persuaded to do was try to get it changed or repealed or something. She really often tries to take the side of safety over the side of freedom, but you know, again, that's why you have debate in society to try to get the laws to be the way they should be.
Yep.
So, good questions, tough ones.
And I wonder if that right of privacy ties into a current University of Wisconsin system policy in which the University of Wisconsin system reaches out to the local community, and especially to the judiciary part of that community, and finds out information about students who have been charged with crimes and holds its own essentially judge and jury, and claims that they have been academic misconduct, even though the individual may or may not have even ever been proven guilty or gone to court yet?
Right. Actually, that would be under the non-academic conduct policy, I think. And I actually know about UW-Stout 1718 pretty well because I did a speaking tour of Wisconsin 3 or 4 years ago when all of that was getting hashed out. I spoke before the Board of Regents about it. And so the way the policy works is that you don't actually get in trouble until there are several instances, more than one at least, that are bad enough that it actually does affect the university in a significant way. And so I think, and I don't remember quite so well, but I think the word is significant. You can't just have an incidental, like you embarrassed the university because you got drunk and you peed on somebody's lawn. That's not enough. But if you do it 3 or 4 times, and now the neighbors are all banging on the university's door because it's been severe enough, that starts to be where the university can start to punish you. Now there's another consideration, which is again the safety consideration. So let's say there are a lot of witnesses and they all say that you're the one who committed mass murder against those 5 people off campus. And you've been arrested, but the trial's not going to happen for 6 months, and the standard of evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt. You might even get found innocent, even though there's lots of witnesses, because maybe the prosecutor, maybe you're O.J. Simpson, the prosecutor messed up, right? Should the school do nothing and just say, well, the court system found you not guilty, so even though everyone thinks you're a mass murderer, we're just going to let you stay on campus? That can't quite be right either. So somewhere between that scenario and you got a parking ticket and the university found out and charged you with non-academic misconduct is the right answer. And I don't quite know where to draw that line. The university has a legitimate interest in knowing what's happening off campus for you, but only if there's a real risk of some problem happening because of that on campus. So it's hard to define that. And I think UW-Stout 1718 do a good job of defining off-campus conduct in a way that matters for the on-campus situation. It's not ideal from the student point of view. Students did a good job advocating for something even weaker. But the citizens of Milwaukee just were really not happy with even as weak as it was. Because, I don't know if Stout has the same problem that like Madison and Milwaukee have, but there's lots of underage drinking and lots of mayhem, and that's what the neighbors were really trying to get to happen, but you couldn't get individual schools to do it. It had to be system-wide. So that's why you guys are here living under a policy caused by your fellow students years ago, in other cities.
I had a question that I started out with. I was curious how many institutions, and you stressed this idea of collaboration, but how many institutions do you end up going to and having sessions like this after an incident?
Very few. And so UW-Stout is on the short list of universities that not only solved the problem, but began to do something constructive about it. So what's interesting is I had a great experience doing that tour a few years ago, and I got a really good feeling about the UW system and kind of citizen participation in the university governance system and in general in Wisconsin, which I was really happy about. And so I was also really happy to see that UW-Stout turn this negative into a positive also. Hopefully it continues to be a positive. I don't know what's happening in Professor Miller's department or kind of the individual, personal stuff that might have been involved there, but as an institution, it seems to be working. Syracuse is an example on the short list of schools that have not learned this lesson, where they try to expel a law student, and then the next year a different school, the School of Education, actually does expel an education student for something even stupider. And when you have leadership from the top that establishes a culture of respect for free speech, those things happen less often. When you have a culture which I think is caused by Nancy Cantor at Syracuse, where we want everyone to be nice to each other, and we're not really going to step in to resolve a problem with free speech. It just encourages lower level deans and heads of schools to do what they want. So Syracuse is a real problem in contrast to Stout in that way.
In the time remaining, I wondered if Tim would say a few words and perhaps you've seen the protocol that's been developed here. If you could comment on that, and Tim could just give a brief summary for the audience.
Sure. I'm sorry I didn't give more time for you earlier to do that, but we're okay.
That's fine. In the weeks following the initial incident, the chancellor asked a group of people to get together to try and create a process to deal with any complaints that were brought forward in the future. And so myself and 4 people from the administrative side of the university had a series of conversations. I don't know how many times we met. We met a lot of times. And they were very, I would say, frank and honest and open meetings where people had disagreements and we had our arguments. But we had a job, and the job was to come up with a process. And so the process we have proposed, and hopefully the Faculty Senate will be voting on this at next Tuesday's meeting. We hope then the Student Senate will also give a look at this, and we hope also that the Senate of Academic Staff will also give a look at this. And we'll have hopefully approval from all of them, maybe with some changes or additions or other things. But the process basically is sort of a tiered approach. So the first tier is this true threat. So if campus police get a phone call complaining and it's a true threat, they have to act. Okay? There isn't another committee that needs to meet. There isn't. If it's a true threat, that's clear they have to act. In some cases, it may not be entirely clear how true the threat is. If there's time to avert, they may have the risk assessment team meet to determine whether it really qualifies as a true threat or not. Those cases are extremely rare. I mean, that's a bomb threat. That's a gunpoint threat. True threats are extremely rare, at least on this campus and all over. If it's a true threat, they have to act. If it's not a true threat, then it goes to the next level. And the committee would be informed of the complaint, and the committee would take a look at the complaint. The committee has the ability to consult with legal counsel and anyone else we want. So if we get a case and it's clear to us there's no merit to the complaint, we would simply provide an account to the person of why we believe there's no legitimacy to their complaint. If we believe there is some legitimacy to the complaint, we would do some investigation of the facts, talk to various people involved, consult others as needed, to determine whether any action really needs to be taken. At that point, any number of different things could happen. You might find out when you investigate the facts there really is nothing to the complaint, and then you would go through a kind of dismissal process. You might find out there really is something to the complaint, but the person doesn't want to pursue the case anymore for whatever reason. They want to drop their complaint. Depending again on the facts, if they want to drop the complaint, but there really are problems in the case that the university would be legally responsible for, the university will still have to deal with that in some way. If it's not a case like that, then it would be a case would be dropped. If they want to pursue, if there's a legitimate basis for the complaint and they want to pursue it further, then we would refer that to the appropriate body. So if it's a student, it's going to go to the student side of things. If it's an employee, it will go to the employee and be dealt with according to the employee handbook. So it doesn't establish any new policies. It doesn't define any terms in new ways. It's a process that's going to deal with the complaints as they come in and refer them to the appropriate bodies for action if there is any need. So the point of it is to avoid cases like Jim's case. The point of the policy is not to go out and look for speech to censor. The point of the policy is to ensure that we don't censor speech, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Well, as I said before, probably the best part of it is how quickly you make that determination that something's either a threat or not a threat. If it's a threat, you've got to act on it, and it goes right to the people who actually know about what to do about threats, the police. And then, if it also is a threat, then the university has a choice whether to discipline the person for making a threat. That's the university's own choice. The police well, they don't even have to act on the threat, but they really should. And the university has its own choice about what to do about it on an institutional level, and might also take action if there's like an emerging, a gunman on campus. So that, separates like the real serious cases from the rest of them. And then the other good thing is that you separate the clearly unthreatening cases from the middle gray area cases, which may almost never happen. Where maybe it's a threat, maybe it's not, the police aren't really so sure, we need more information, because maybe there's context that would show that there really is a threat. So you do that investigation, you figure it out. But most of the time, if somebody's going to complain about something that's a threat, you say, well, actually, are you afraid for your life, or are you just annoyed? And they're going to say, well, actually, I was just annoyed. I feel unsafe, but come on. Did you just say you feel unsafe, or would a reasonable person feel unsafe? And this is what we got like with the students yesterday with this professor. Students have kind of learned that if they say, I feel unsafe, that automatically triggers the threat assessment team, and they can get somebody in trouble and investigated. And then the university's response is, well, every case has to be investigated. We can't just do nothing. And they don't have this step that you have in your proposed policy here, which says, even if it's true, if it's not a threat, then it's done. That's the extent of the investigation, then it's done. And a lot of schools don't do that. They might have a 6-month investigation simply because somebody said, I feel unsafe around my professor because he's against gay marriage. Right? And that's similar to what the students said to me yesterday. And again, they want to get this language of safety out there because they know that triggers a lot of things. And you need to be able to say, as the university lawyer will often do, or the dean of students will say, all right, you say you feel unsafe, but what happened? Oh, he said a mean thing to me. He was rude. Well, no, you feel uncomfortable and you feel offended, but you don't feel unsafe. And this policy helps distinguish between true incidents where somebody's unsafe from false incidents where they're just upset, and then leaves that little narrow gray area where you need the extra information. So I like that overall way of handling it.
I should maybe add one other thing. Most of the members of this committee, well, I should say all the members of the committee, are interested in going beyond the strict mandates. And, for example, taking a look at these policies that Adam has listed here that are not so great policies in terms of free speech, and maybe trying to take some corrective action to improve some of the policies and not just have this process. Maybe take some further sort of proactive educational steps to inform the campus community more broadly. It's great we have the group we do, but a lot of people aren't here and probably could stand to hear a bit of this message too.
It really is fundamental to the university to have people from the inside say, you know what, we want to be the kind of place that fully respects First Amendment rights, free speech rights, because that's the kind of university we are. And that means we're going to fight bad speech with better speech. We're not going to have policies that simply tell people they're going to be punished for having the wrong views, for have the wrong attitudes, like the whole UW-S policy has. And if you have a bunch of people there from the student and the faculty and maybe even the administrative sides saying from the inside, hey, we want this. It's not just some outside group from Philadelphia, but we care about this ourselves. That makes so much of a difference. And we find out even one faculty member writing the president or the provost saying, hey, can we just change the words in this policy? It's violating every student's rights every day. It's not hard to fix it. You just take out that one word. You just change the sentence. You get cooperation. And if no one's willing to stick their neck out and even do that small thing, it's sad for the university to think that there's not even one person who's going to do that. So at least you'll have hopefully your committee will do that, but hopefully the students in the audience will want to do that too. And establishing a culture of respect for student rights is also going to help you when it comes to those harder questions like smoking, because you'll actually have a community of people who say, you know what, we care about individual rights in such an important way that maybe we can persuade the rest of the community to take our side on other individual rights issues that don't involve free speech, but about other things. So the overall message is know your rights, exercise your rights, and defend your rights. And as soon as your rights are violated, come to fire sooner rather than later, as Jim did, because he came to us and within like a day, he had all of the information to us. We had the full documentation, and we could write a letter by the next day because we had it. And so if you don't document the thing that happened to you, it's almost like it didn't happen. Because now it's just your word against somebody else's, usually an administrator's, and guess who's going to win that one? So document, 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 act early, and then be willing to go to bat for your fundamental liberties. Thanks, everybody.
Just on behalf of UW-Stout, I'd like to extend our appreciation. I think this was an amazing couple of hours, and I think we all learned a great deal. I think again, I wish the room had a few more people in it, but I think the message will be sound, will flow. And Tim, thanks to Jim for your work in this and your commitment and for holding the line, and thank you to Fire, and thank you to all for coming out today, and we'll keep the communications coming, and we may have one more session yet this spring semester, so watch the daily news and watch for posters. Maybe we'll put some violence up in them to get more attention next time, and we hope to see you again at an Ethics Center and Social Science Society event. Thanks again.